My name is Edin Mujagic. I was born in what used to be Yugoslavia, Bosnia, and I've been living in Holland since 1992. I've actually studied macroeconomics not so far from here, so thank you for the chance to be back in the root region for me as a professional. What I'm not is, I'm not very successful basketball player, but I do love the game. As you were saying, my formal function is I'm chief economist at OHV Wealth Management, a company based in the capital city, but also in a couple of other places in Holland. Just to give you a scope where my story will be heading, let me show you a little video. And this is the moment we always hope that technology will not abandon us. So just for the sake of the time, I'm going to stop it here, but the gist of the movie is, in 1995, biologists reintroduced only 15 wolves in Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone National Park is as big as Holland and Belgium together. And by introducing 15 wolves, they changed the Yellowstone National Park in many ways. One of the ways, even the little rivers running through the Yellowstone National Park took another course. So the point is, when you make small changes, really small changes, like this one, the chances are that the effects will be enormous. And the change that has been made in 1971 is one of the changes that have influenced our day-to-day lives for the past 50 years and will keep influencing it in the next years as well. So what has happened in 1971? Lots of things, some more important, some less important. Here are a couple of examples of the last category. Joe Frazier beat Muhammad Ali, something everybody thought was impossible, happened in 1971. The first Starbucks was opened in 1971. As is the Walt Disney World in Orlando, and of course one of the most famous music productions, Sticky Fingers by Rolling Stones, was also published in 71. And there is a rumor that our previous speaker was also born in 1971, so you can add that to the compilation here. Now let me go back to the more important things that have happened in 1971. And one of those is that the very first email was sent in that year. Another one is that the first microchip, Intel 4004, was sold, and the predecessor of the USB stick, the floppy disk, was made for sale in 1971. And you can see all those things as a kind of a starting point of the digitalization of the societies in the world. It all started in 1971. Another important thing, the American President Richard Nixon announced again in 71 he's going to visit China. which when you say it now, it's, well, nothing special really. In 1971, it was a big deal because US and China did not have relations since the end of the Second World War. So by going to China, Nixon in effect invited China to join us all, and the process of globalization has started. So we have 1 year with the process of globalization started and the digitalization of our day-to-day lives. And then there was another thing. And this is also a short video. I'm just going to ask you to please not fall to sleep and to watch.
The strength of a nation's currency is
Richard
based
Nixon.
on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and the strength of a nation.
So he says, I have instructed the Ministry of Finance to suspect the convertibility of dollar into gold. It sounds incredibly boring, right? But it's not, because it has made a lot of things possible for the governments which were not possible before August 15th, 1971. And for me, it was the main reason to write a book about it, about the consequences of one decision on 15th of August 1971. I've had the greatest pleasure to talk to the guy who suggested that course of action to Richard Nixon. He's the guy on the left, by the way. It's Paul Volcker, really huge man. He used to be the president of the Fed, the central bank in the US, and in the much later he was working with President Barack Obama as well. Sadly, he passed away in 2019, and the last time we spoke to each other was at the end of 2018. And as I was leaving his house, he was saying to me, "You write a good book." So I can only hope that the book you have seen here is a good book, actually. Now, well, to make a really long story really short, what has happened on August 15, 1971? What has been made possible since that day? Well, it boils down to debt-fueled GDP growth. So we have started to rely more and more for economic growth by borrowing money and spending money. That's basically it. Why wasn't it possible before 1971? Because up to August 15, 1971, every single dollar that was printed had to be backed by gold. So the only way you could print more dollars is you had to make sure you also have more gold in your vaults. Since 15 August 1971, that's gone. You can print as many dollars as you want. And that is exactly what has been happening in the US. What you see here is the deficit of the federal government in the US. If you look really carefully, you can see that up to 1971, the US government only borrowed money in times of war. But in normal times, it was always, they spent as much as they got in every year. Since 1971, it changes completely, because since 1971, you could print dollars like it's nothing. You didn't have to make sure that there is an even amount of increase of gold in your vault. The effect of spending more money every year than you get is clearly to be seen in the national debt of the US, what you see right here. Look at the graph, and again, it's 1970s, especially 1971, where the line starts to go up. So if you think, well, that's the US, they always do stuff you are not supposed to do. These are the numbers for Holland, one of the countries we all say, well, if there is one country in the world that's prudent with the finances, then it's Holland. The same thing happening here. Look at the 50s, look at the 60s, and then look at 1971 and the years afterwards. Even we start spending much more money than we got in every year. Now, what was the consequence of that? The amount of national debt in the world is enormous. Let's have a look at the US. It's 131% of the GDP of the US. By any standard, it's way, way too high. And we will see later on why is it too high. It's not only government that have been borrowing money, it's all of us actually as well. And you can see some numbers here for, this is the total debt in those countries for the governments, the companies, and the households. Altogether, we are now at, in Japan, for example, 408% of the GDP of Japan. It's huger than huge. So, what do you need? What has started in 1971 is the game of spending more money than you have. So basically living beyond your means. And what do you need for that game to go on and to keep it going on? Well, the first thing you need is the money press. Check. What you see here is the amount of the new dollars printed in the US every year. And just to give you a fact which blew my mind away, 20%, so 1 in 5 of every American dollar ever printed was printed last year. 1 in 5 ever since the dollar saw the daylight. 1 in 5 was printed last year. So when you do that, when you show the graph showing that there is really too much money going around, I can imagine one of you saying, well, is it too much? How do you compare that? Well, that's the second graph you see here. Whenever the increase of new money is higher than the increase of the GDP, it's been too much money every year. And look carefully at the lines here, and you will see up to 67, 68, those lines go hand in hand. And after 71, it's a rule rather than an exception that the amount of new money brought into the system was higher than the increase of the GDP. That's where the things start to go horribly wrong. So you can see it here in another way. So what else do you need to keep the game of living beyond your means going on? Well, the second thing you need is the interest rates you have to pay on your debt have to go down, because increasing your debt with higher interest rates makes the game stop fairly soon. So you need the interest rates to go down. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that has happened as well. This is the official interest rates of the central bank in the US. And if you look at the graph, you will see clearly that since the end of the 70s, it's been going down, down, and down. Now, there is another thing you also need to make sure the game can go on, and that's you have to have a little bit inflation every year. The prices have to rise. Why? Because if you increase your debt, inflation every year helps to eat away a little bit of the debt you're increasing. So I think nobody here will be surprised if I say that the conclusion is that condition has also been met since 1971. You see the inflation rate in the US, and it's clear to see that when you compare the inflation rate in the 60s and in the 50s, regularly it was much lower than after 71. The result of this incredibly boring stat for you is that the purchasing power of the dollar has been going down. And you can see it clearly here. This is the explanation when you hear people say, or you read people that you could buy much more stuff with $5 in 1974 or 75 than you can do now. This is it. The purchasing power of your dollar has been going down. So all of this was combined with the general feeling of the day that the society shouldn't be left on its own to grow, but the government should mold it, make it possible, to steer it in a way you want it to go. So what do you need for that? What do you need for steering the society? You need money. Well, it's a good thing that since 1971 you could print as many dollars as you thought you needed. Well, this system of living beyond your means has, in any case, two big problems down the road. The first one being it cannot go on forever. We'll talk about that in a little bit of time. Let me just go to the second problem. It entails an enormous amount of collateral damage. And I will give you a couple of examples of that. Real wages. So when people hear that their wage is going up by 2% or 3% or 5%, it's only the half of the story. What is the increase of your real wage? You have to subtract inflation from the increase of the wage. Now, when you look back since 1971, and you look at the increase in real wage, you come to the conclusion that for a large part, the middle class in the US, but also in Europe, has seen either no increase in real wage or just a little bit, which is a big problem down the road. The second problem is you create what we call zombie companies, companies that are basically so inefficient they should disappear. And that's the whole point of the capitalism, by the way. Companies that are not able to keep up with the pace with the rest of us have to disappear to make room available for new companies to grow. Well, the number of zombie companies in the 70s was about 2% of the total. Now we're up to 20%, and in some countries 25%. So what you're basically doing is you're keeping inefficient companies from going out of business, which has enormous negative consequences for the economy at large. The government sector is in all countries, even in the US, much larger than it was in the 1970s. We have high debt. It led to the inequality between people. This is the story about 1% and 99%. This is the reason why many people go to the streets. They are finding out now, some 40, 50 years later, that their real wages have not increased at all. So they're feeling betrayed. They're feeling that they've been robbed. And the problem with that is when you're angry and you live in a democracy, you take that feeling with you when you go to vote. And you tend to cast your vote for parties that are proposing very simple solutions for complex problems. I know, I was born in Yugoslavia, which was one of the problems we have had there. This is the reason why you see the enormous increase in populism in Europe and the US since 2007, 2008. Because 2007, 2008, the game of living beyond your means threatened to stop. And that was the moment many people have found out that they have been robbed for 40 years. Their real wages have not increased at all. So then you go and you say, well, if you say you're going to solve all my problems by saying we will take Holland out of the euro and out of the EU, it resonates with the people because they think, you know what, maybe that is the solution. And you go and cast your vote for those parties. And then you got all of those, protectionism is very high. What I mean by that, you make sure that the products made in China, US, other European countries are made more expensive when you get them to Holland. Well, that works fine as long as other countries don't say, you know what, if you're going to make my products expensive in your country, I'm going to make your products more expensive in my country. Nobody wins. Has been on the level of protectionism has been exceptionally high and has started increasing in 2007 again. So you see all those relationships in there. So why is it a big deal? Because, very short summary, everything we have spoken about just in the last 5 minutes slows down the GDP growth. And that's something we all really hate, because we would like to see the growth of the GDP increasing every year. It also leads to something else. It's the erosion of trust people have in the governments. There's even erosion of trust in capitalism. When you look at the surveys now, either in the US or in Europe, some 50% of those aged 35 or younger say they wouldn't mind living in a country that is socialist by nature. Now, we have learned a lot from history. We know socialism is not a way to increase the welfare for all of us. And still it resonates with the people because you are losing trust in the people who are leading us. And we're also losing trust in central banks. And now, why did I separate central banks from the rest? Because basically those are my sheets you're seeing here. I'm in charge of what I'm going to show you, and I just wanted to make sure I have an opening to tell you a story I really like. And to tell you the story I really like has everything to do with the trust people have to have in their money in order to make society go around. And let me just take you on a journey to the small island of Yap. You can see where it's is to be found. And why the small island of Yap? These huge stones you see here were once money on Yap. Now, the stones could not be found on the island itself, but you have to sail away to an island 600 kilometers away to get them. And one time, there was a group of people sailing to that island, and they found a beautiful, beautiful large stone there. And they said, well, this has to go with us back home. And they sailed back home, but they came in a storm. And the only way they could make it alive out of the storm is to throw away the stone into the water. So they did it. They sailed back home, they came home, and they told the story about the beautiful big stone they had found. And sadly, they had to leave it behind. And what happened on Yap is that the people on the island said, well, you know what? If you say you had a big, beautiful stone and you had to throw it away to save yourselves, we're going to believe you. And that stone, which nobody has ever seen, was used on Yap as money. There were people buying and selling land, everything, using the stone that was lying beneath the ocean, stone nobody has ever seen. Trust. If you have enough trust, you can literally make money out of stones. And the trust has been eroding since 1971, and one of the consequences of that is the Bitcoin. Bitcoin has been born out of the trust in central banks going down the drain, just like the stone on the idol of Yap. So let's just go back to what's the consequence right now of all of this. In 2007, 2008, we found out that the increase of debt has reached a critical point in the sense that the debts became too high. And what we have been doing since 2007, 2008 is we've been kicking the can down the road. Now, what do you need for kicking the can down the road? You need a good solid foot, you need a can, and you need a road that doesn't end. And now we do have 2 solid feet, we have a can, but the road we use is at its end. And I'm going to show you just why. This is most likely the most boring graph you've ever seen, and certainly you have seen today here. But this is the most important graph you will see this year. What this says is, what's the amount of extra GDP, of extra richdom, you get out of $1 extra debt? As long as that number is above 1, you're gaining. You take out extra debt, you invest it, and it brings you more than what you've than the increase of your debt. What we're seeing here is the number is approaching 0. And in some countries it's even negative, which means the more you increase your debt as a government, and think of Italy, think of Greece, think of Spain, the more you increase your debt, it doesn't help you out of the problems, it makes the problems you have even worse. And that's the point we are right now. I'm not saying it's game over as of today, but we're awfully close to the point that the system we have been using and working with in the last 50 years just doesn't work anymore. So what does all this mean? Should we all now say, well, doom and gloom, my God, what a depressing story before we're gonna eat now? Well, not quite, because the answer in my mind would be a really hard no. Why is that? Because I'm going to make sure you don't have to wait much longer before you have to go to eat. But there are a lot and lots of things you can see right now, which you can say, those are the signals that the new age, better economic age, is not only coming toward, it has already started. And sadly, I don't have lots of more time to give you a number of those signals. I have understand from Pete that everybody who would like to take that book with him or with her, you will get it after the dinner, I think. So all those signals you can find in the book itself. Let me just say that when you look at the history, you see a couple of periods which have a lot of similarity with what we are living right now since 2007. And the history teaches us that those periods of turbulence last some 15 years on average, and they are always the transition period between 2 periods of good times. So the good news is we're almost there. if you take that we have started that period of turbulence in 2007, this is year 14th, 15 year on average is, we're really almost there. The bad news is it always ends with a big bang. So the really deep crisis you need to end the transition period, I think has not happened yet, and most likely will happen in the years we are now. What is what are those signals? How can I try to make it easier for you to see what I'm talking about? Well, when I was a young boy, 14, 15 years old, before I moved to Holland, Star Trek was one of my favorite series ever. And you could see all those people using phones, and it was science fiction. And when I go to Netflix now and watch Star Trek from those days, and I see them all using all those technology, I think it's not science fiction anymore. We're all using it now in any way, shape or form. So what it means is lots of things we are seeing now on the TV, in the media, you hear people talk about, it sounds like science fiction, but remember, Star Trek also sounded like science fiction, and 15, 20 years later, it's science fact. And this is something that's been around as long as we have started walking on our 2 feet. People innovate. People invent things. And by inventing new things, we make sure that from time to time a new economic age comes around. So let me just have a look at the time. I'm now 38 minutes in, so I'm way overdue. So let's just go really fast to what are now the lessons the people who will lead us in the years to come could learn from 1971 and 2021. So what are the things you should and should not do to make it possible that in that new age I was talking about, everybody, and I would like to underline the word everybody, profits from it, instead of, as since 71, large groups of people are finding out 40, 50 years later that enormous increase in GDP, and it has not reached them, or reached them hardly. So what are the things you really have to do? First is make sure no company can get a monopoly position. This has happened before, 100 years ago, and in US, at the time it was the railway companies that were forced to split to make sure there's competition between companies, because at the end of the day, competition is the only thing making sure you innovate, you make new things. If you don't have to fear any competition, well, you said, why would I spend any money to find out new things? Because I can sell what I'm making right now because there is no competition. So the first thing is you have to say to Google, to Facebook, to Apple, we love you, but for the sake of the society, you have to split up, because we cannot allow you to become too large. The other thing is you should stop aiming that the prices increase every year, because that hurts middle class, and by hurting middle class, you are hurting the society at large. You're opening the door for populism, protectionism, etc. All kinds of things we don't like to see. So stop aiming for inflation every year. Why do we aim for inflation every year? As I was saying, that was one of the key ingredients for the game living beyond your means. So when you say we have to stop aiming for inflation, that means at the same time we have to say goodbye to the debt-fueled GDP growth economic model. Now we talk for the last 5 years about everything has to be, how do you say, duurzaam, sustainable. Everything has to be sustainable. Well, I would say, including the economy. It should be sustainable as well. And it's this week, exactly 50 years ago, again 1971, that John Lennon has sung Imagine All the People. Well, I would say, imagine that we could learn from the mistakes we've made in the last 50 years, what kind of a world would be ahead of us and what kind of world we'll be leaving for the children and the children of our children. So I think just a little bit above my allotted time. I'm sorry about that, but this was the last slide, and I thank you for the fact that you didn't fall asleep.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from anybody?
First of all, as Edin said, everyone will get his new book. It's Dutch, sorry for the guys from abroad. If you leave on that side, you will get a copy of his book, Keerpunt 71. One question for me, you talk about the changing point, which probably will be some kind of big bang.
Yeah.
What is the possibilities we have to think about?
Well, the changing point, in my view, look, if you conclude that the problem, the largest problem, the most serious problem we are having right now is the fact that we have too much debt. When you recognize that's the problem, then you can start solving it. And by solving it, you can make that process controllable. You're in control of how you're going to solve it and how fast are you going to solve it. My fear is, and I see it all around me, we didn't, and by saying we, the men and women leading us, they are not even ready to take the step one, recognizing that we have a problem. So my fear is that the problem will at the end solve itself, because when the debts are too high, the game stops. We are seeing right now, I was saying you need falling, you need the debts to go up and the interest rates to go down. As long as those two things happen, the game is going on. Interest rates now are at zero. They cannot fall anymore. And debts are too high for many. So there is lots of people in Holland and outside not trying to figure out how to go to the bank and to get more money. They're trying to figure out how to get rid of the debt they already have. So the game stops. And if you allow the game and the problem to solve itself, the nasty thing is it's uncontrollable. You don't have any control over it. And that's my fear. Because step one, recognizing we have a problem, is needed for step two, starting to solve the problem. And we're not even ready or willing to say we have a problem with high debt. Because when you look at everything that has happened since 2007, what was the way we have tried to solve every economic problem since 2007 is by increasing the amount of debt. That's not step one. Step one is saying we cannot go down that lane. There is nothing that is pointing out that we are ready for step one. That's my fear.
That would end up in...
You said only one question, Pete. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So
if I'm allowed.
It ends up in a catastrophe for many individuals.
Yeah,
I think in the end it's more the individuals that are...
it's always the individuals.
Yeah.
But will it be a high interest rate that will create chaos, that people can't borrow money anymore, or what inflation that
no. Look, we have all been brought up and by if the GDP doesn't increase every year, that's a bad thing. Even more, if it increases but the increase is lower than the last year, that's a bad thing as well. So we expect the GDP increase to be higher every year. If that doesn't happen, we think, well, that's bad. It's not bad. It's part of the making sure the economic growth is sustainable. And it's part of recognizing the way we have been playing the game since 1971 cannot go on much longer because interest rates are zero and debt is too high for many people, many companies, and many countries. So when will it happen? I have no idea. How it will happen? Not a clue. Will it happen? Hell yes.
A few years.
Give it a few years' time, says the CEO.
A few years.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions from anyone else?
If you're going to blame anybody now why you're still sitting here and not there, it's him and him, by the way. It's not me anymore.
Sorry, it's a really quick.
Yeah.
Who's doing it right? Which countries are doing it right? If anyone.
Well, we here in Holland, for a part, but there are a number of countries doing the things they should do, but those countries are the small countries, and we need the US to do the right thing, because if the US starts behaving as it should start behaving, it helps the other countries to show the same kind of behavior as well. If a little Switzerland starts behaving like it should, well, with all due respect, who the hell is little Switzerland? So we need to get the US, we need to get China, and we need to get the European Union to come together and say, look, this is not sustainable, we have to change. When you look at the situation in the world now, what are the chances that the US, Europe and China would be able to sit down and agree on anything except that the sun rises in the east and sets down in the west? I think those chances are really, really slim. And now we can go to you.
I have one final question myself.
Oh.
Can I ask one? Maybe this is more of a question to discuss over a drink later.
Okay, see you there.
More of a thought, but I guess like you're talking a lot about, I guess the economic or financial sustainability, right? But
yeah,
there must be lots of intersections here too with environmental approaches and environmental sustainability, because I mean, even talking about monopolies and holding organizations accountable and having competition between them, like there must be a lot of overlap here in terms of thinking about an economic crisis that we're going into, but an environmental one as well.
Yeah.
So it's a very open-ended question, I guess.
No, it's not.
What are your thoughts around that?
And it's a great question. When you look at the fact 1971, first email, first computer microchip, it all was the consequence of the speech by JFK in 1962. In 1962, he said, before the end of this decade, we will land a man on the moon. Do you remember that speech? The problem at that point in time, in 1962, the guys at NASA thought, wait a second, we have no idea how to do that. But in 1969, there was an American walking on the moon. So in those 7 years, they went to work and to find the new technology to make it happen. And they did it. And the technology they found helped not only to get the man on the moon, but it found its way into a lot of products we now take for granted. Your laptop is a direct consequence of we will go to the moon, because We did have computers back then, but flying with the computers the size of a living room, not so much. So they went to work to find out how can we fit that giant machine into something that can actually fly. Laptop was born, and lots of other things. So it was a kind of a spark to ignite the race to find out new things. Now, when I look right now in 2021, is there any kind of a spark right now? Well, there is. Whether you like it or not, it's not the issue, but all governments in the world have said we want to reduce CO2 by 2030 and to be completely neutral in 2050. Great thing. The fact is, we have no idea how to get there. If we have learned anything from the corona last year, is closing the economy completely down doesn't get us there. So that's not the solution, not even in theory. But then I think of JFK in 1962. By setting a goal right now, and however unachievable that goal might be, you create a spark. There are universities and scientists right now working at how can we devise new technology to make sure we can keep producing things by reducing CO2 levels. And if history is any guide, we know we will succeed. And the technology found for that goal will be used to make all other things which are science fiction now to be science facts in 10, 15 years' time. And that's the reason why, despite the problems we have, at the end of the day, I would say don't be negative. There is not a reason to be negative. The future is bright.
Thank you. I think that's a great point to end with. Very optimistic.
I'm all about hope.
Thank you, Edin. Let's give a round of applause.